All right, hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I am joined, as always, by my co-host John Kelly. We're going to be talking UFC Columbus going down this Saturday. We got a heavyweight main event between Curtis Blades and Chris Daukaus. We got 13 fights slated ahead of us. We're coming off of UFC London, which was an action-packed card, a lot of fun. John, I think both of us had some success betting on the card, but I'm certainly excited to keep the ball rolling here. Not a great main event, but 13 fights on the card. I think there should be some action-packed scraps within it. How are you doing? Are you looking forward to another fight week on the road here?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the eighth fight card in a row, so we've definitely been through a nice little stretch here, coming off a big week last week. I think we both had a pretty big week, so hoping to close it out before the 1 week off here. Stay hot for the boys, and we'll see what we can cook up come Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. It's like when you have these streaks of like 8, 10 cards in a row, just betting on them in general, it gets a little, it gets tiring in general. But we're almost at the home stretch. We got a week off next week, one more week to crush before we get there. I know you've got some bets on the card. I actually haven't placed any bets yet. Today was kind of my first day looking into the card. I was away, took a break from my computer for the first time in a long time, so I was away for the first 3 days of this week. I haven't placed any bets yet, but kind of excited to get your opinions on the card, John. We really haven't talked at all throughout fight week. So curious your thoughts on all these fights. Let's get started here. First fight of the night, we got Bruno Souza as a small favorite. He's minus 120, $7,900 on DraftKings. That's of note because he's the cheaper fighter on DraftKings, despite being a small favorite in the fight when he takes on Luis Saldana this weekend, who comes back even money. He's plus 100, 8.3K for Saldana. And John, this is a fight that I just kind of have no interest in betting straight off the bat. You know, Bruno Souza is a guy who came over from LFA. Is a very I don't even want to say unique fighting style. I would call it a boring fighting style, really. He's a guy who a lot of lateral movement to his game. He backtracks a lot. He doesn't move forward really at all against his opponents. Kind of plays that game where he's just trying to avoid getting hit at all costs. Goes to decision a good amount. And then Luis Saldana, contender series guy, won his UFC debut against Jordan Griffin in a fight that I scored the other way, and then lost to Austin Lingo his last time out. I believe both of us cashed a bet in that fight. But Luis Saldana, decent kicker, doesn't really do a ton outside of that, kind of a rangy kickboxer. This is a fight where I expect both guys to be kind of at distance for the majority of the 15 minutes, not a ton of strikes to be thrown. Betting on certainly are close. Interesting, I guess, on DraftKings because of the pricing discrepancy compared to the Vegas odds. But honestly, John, nothing has really caught my eye in terms of the money line for this matchup. Are you interested in a side here? And if not, any interest kind of in DraftKings, even if you're multi-entry income this weekend?
Yeah, this is a tough fight to break down because on one hand you have Souza, who we really haven't seen him much of at the UFC level. Obviously, I think he's the former featherweight champ, I want to say, in LFA, but he's really not like super inspiring. And then the only time we've seen him in the UFC, you know, Melsik Bogdasarian, my guy, just basically outstruck him for 15 minutes. You know, I think he actually won a round against Melsik, but Melsik tends to fade. It wasn't like he was like killing him or anything like that. I mean, he has that like karate style striking, like you mentioned. He's going to use a ton of footwork, try to evade strikes, but he's really not doing a ton with his striking. And then it's like he has a black belt in jiu-jitsu. His grappling's not bad, but he's not really ever looking to offensively like use it, at least not in like a high output type of way, where if he would, then maybe I'd have some interest targeting him against Luis Saldana here, who's basically just a striker. He obviously has the flashy leg kicks, decent boxing, but the thing about Saldana is, like, I expect him to be winning the striking exchanges here. Landing off more volume. Those kicks are going to be a problem. That big body kick, he likes to go body kick and then immediately after go up top to the head. I think he could land a few of those here. The issue with Saldana is the issue in all of his fights is like the cardio is not good. Like, he always slows down. He always almost seemingly gets hurt later in rounds, but it's not real like his durability is bad. It's just because his cardio is so bad that he tends to get hurt. Like we saw it in that Austin Lingo fight. You know, he hurt to the body, almost finished in that fight, and then I believe he was hurt again in one of his later fights earlier on. But it's just a spot where I think it's lined about right. You know, I expect Saldana to win round one at a decent clip, but outside of that, I mean, I have no trust in this guy. And then on the flip side, it's like I don't really want to back Souza because I don't know if he's going to come in here and wrestle like he should. So we might just see like an ugly striking match where Saldana wins round one, probably loses round 3, and then it comes up to however you score round 2. And I don't really have a ton of interest there. In terms of DraftKings, there's 13 fights, so I don't think either of these guys are a core piece for me. I would lean with Souza having more upside, just because it's like if he does come out here and randomly push a pace with the grappling, I think he would have more upside than Saldana in this matchup. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, I really don't have a ton of interest in this fight.
Fair enough. I don't think we need to spend too much more time there on the curtain jerker. We can move on to our second fight of the evening, which features two pretty exciting flyweights. I think this should be another competitive bout. It is certainly lined as such, similar to the first fight of the night. We got David Dvorak currently a minus 125, small favorite. He's $8,400 on DraftKings. He takes on Matthias Nikolai, who comes back plus 105, a little bit better than even money. He's $7,800 on DK. And this is an interesting matchup, John, because flyweight is a division where I think oftentimes kind of these guys, I wouldn't consider them to be the elite of the division per se, but these are certainly two guys who I think are above average in the weight class. We know Dvorak is undefeated in the UFC. I believe he's a perfect 3-0 with a finish in his last fight. And then Nikolai has kind of been out there and fought pretty much the elite of the division before. He's fought Manel Cup. He has a Louis Smolka fight from earlier in his career, Tim Elliott fight most recently, but he's put together a win streak of his own, has Nikolai. So these are two guys riding win streaks coming into this matchup. Certainly projected to be a close fight per the market. How do you see it playing out, John? Do you think it's as close as the fight is lined, or do you favor one side pretty significantly?
I think it's pretty close. I mean, David Dvorak, he's looked good, but like the level of competition is cheeks. Like he outside of who's the first dude he fought in the UFC?
Dvorak fought Bruno Silva
Bruno
first, but then he
Silva,
fought like Espinosa and whatever that
bum.
guy.
And then
He
the
got
dude
suspended
they
for
brought
cocaine.
in, the dude they brought in literally
Yeah,
on short notice just to like a warm body that they brought
yeah,
off
it
the
was a
street.
Colombian kid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I don't
that's
even
the
know his
first
name, if I'm
time
honest.
Dvorak's got a finish in the UFC. And
Right.
Dvorak's a guy like we saw it. Like he had like the padded record on the regional, finishing everybody, and then he gets to the UFC, and it's like he can't finish toast. And then outside of that bum that they brought in his last fight, so it's like he's looked okay, but he hasn't like been super inspiring to me. And then on the flip side, Matthias Nikolai, he's fought pretty much the best of the best in this division. Like I think the experience is definitely in his favor. I think the grappling would be in his favor as well. The problem with Nikolai is he just doesn't do enough. Like a lot of times, especially in the striking, like I could see Dvorak just winning the striking exchanges solely on his leg kicks, and Nikolai just kind of accepting the back foot, not doing enough. So then we're relying on him to wrestle. And I think he could proactively wrestle here. I just question how much he does it. Historically, he averages like 1.5 takedowns per 15. Like, that's not going to do it for us here. I think he needs to land multiple takedowns here. But I do like the experience. I think he's just more the well-rounded fighter who's fought the better level of competition. So I actually would lean Nikolai in this matchup. But this is another one. I think it's going to decision. I don't think either guy has a ton of upside here. So my lean is Nikolai, but in terms of DraftKings, this is not going to be a core piece for me on one side or the other.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We're kind of on a run of events recently where it feels like if you don't have, fighter X or fighter Y in the first few fights of the night on DraftKings, you're like completely drawing dead to have an optimal team. Although that wasn't the case last week at UFC London, where it seemed like everybody scored 100 or 120 points
Oh
in a
yeah.
win. But I think that the first two fights of the night here are a little bit more favorable, especially considering that hopefully we'll have 11 other fights to pick from. In terms of how I see the fight playing out, from a betting perspective here with Dvorak versus Nikolai. I think Dvorak is a medium-sized favorite to small-sized favorite, I should say. Makes a good amount of sense. Like, I think if Nikolai was plus 130, plus 140, I'd have some interest in betting him because I honestly think there's a chance he's a better fighter. Just Dvorak is slightly higher volume. I think he might be I think Nikolai might be more likely to shoot takedowns, but I'm not sure he's more likely to have success when the fight hits the ground. So I'm cool with favoring Dvorak marginally. I think his kicking game is kind of the X factor here as to why I would make him a favorite. Is Dvorak landed 30 kicks versus Jordan Espinosa. Those are light kicks. Nikolai has struggled with those a little bit historically, kind of throughout a lot of his fights. He's been able to be kicked to the leg. So it's not that I think it's like a weapon where Chris Gutierrez style, someone we'll talk about later in the fight, where he's like a leg kicking specialist. Like, I don't think David Dvorak quite possesses those skills, but I do think it could be a circumstance where like that's the best strike landing consistently throughout the fight. So Dvorak at minus 120, minus 130, whatever he is in the market right now makes a lot of sense to me. Not a fight that I have a ton of interest in getting involved with. I do think it'll be pretty competitive. So happy to sit on the sidelines here. John, we've had two fights so far, two basically coin flip matchups, at least according to the odds. Sounds like both of us don't really have strong opinions. And now we'll move on to two fights with pretty massive favorites that I think will have a big impact on the DraftKings slate for this weekend. First up is Manon Firo. She's a minus 475 favorite, so almost minus 500. Obviously, massive implied win probability there. She's 9.4K on DraftKings, which I will note is currently the most expensive fighter on the slate. We do have one fighter who's minus 800 in our next matchup who has not been priced yet on DraftKings. I'm not really sure what DK is up to, but we would assume that Firo is going to end up being the second most expensive fighter on the slate. But of note, she is still 9.4K. So an expensive price tag against Jennifer Maia here, who comes back plus 350, 6.8K for Jennifer Maia. And Manon Firo is someone who I was kind of unsure about coming into the UFC. You know, I thought she seemed pretty physically gifted. Her kickboxing looked solid. She didn't have a ton of professional experience, but look, she's 3-0 inside the UFC. Are her wins super impressive in Victoria Leonardo, Tabitha Ricci, and Mayra Bueno Silva? Not necessarily. I think, you know, the Silva win is not a bad name to have on your record. The first two, when you consider the circumstances of Leonardo, who probably didn't belong in the promotion, who is small for 115 fighting up a weight class. Like, it's not like Firo has been beating world beaters, but she's 3-0 in the UFC. I think she's looked pretty solid doing so. And then with Jennifer Maia, like, Maia's fought for a UFC title before. I don't know if that's saying a ton at women's 125 pounds these days, but Jennifer Maia's fought pretty much the elite of the division. Big price for Manon Firo this weekend, John, but something tells me, maybe the FTM bets tracker tells me that you're still kind of interested in having some sort of play on the big favorite this weekend.
Yeah, it's first of all, disclaimer, I know it's bad. Adding, you know, a minus 490 or whatever she is to a Juice Boy parlay, but my rebuttal is I just needed a third leg to come through to get a little bit of plus money. And so Firo was that for me. I know it's bad. There's no value in it, but I just think getting the three fighters that I did, which was Blades, Firo, who was the third?
Alexei Grasso.
Grasso, that's it. So I parlayed those three together. In terms of a value perspective, like, this isn't my sharpest bet, I'll say that. I know it's a square parlay, but I honestly think it comes through. And like, parlays have actually been like my biggest like ROI like in the past year, which is kind of crazy
5 and
because
2,
I make fun
plus
of
6.5 units this year. So if you're not going to brag about, or you bragged about a little bit, I'll give the numbers. 5 and 2 this year, not bad.
There you go. Yeah. So I told you before a couple weeks ago, like, I want to do more of it. Just because it has been working out, even though it's like I obviously don't see value in it. But again, you know, you parlay those three, I think they're all win. I think they all win, and you're getting slight plus money on it. Like, I think that's fine. So that's kind of my thought process there. I do think Firo wins. I think she wins a decision here. But even the decision prop wasn't juicy enough. I thought maybe they'd value the KO upside of Firo a little bit more. They ended up not doing that. I think decision is actually the most likely in terms of her props, but this is just a spot where I get it that you would think the line's wide. Like you said, Maia, much more tested. Like, Firo, the level of competition isn't great. She still have a ton of questions with her. Like, I don't think she's like a championship contender, at least not right now, but she does have enough tools where in this matchup, I think she's fine here, just because in order for Maia to even make this like close enough to where it's a sweat, I would think she needs to wrestle here. And it's like, am I going to bet on her to wrestle? We've talked about that before. Like, it's just not something that she does. And I know she landed a takedown against Valentina, blah, blah, blah. But it's just like over the course of her career, she's not wrestling. Like, I'd expect like maybe after she drops the first two rounds, then maybe she comes out and wrestles in the third. So at worst, I think we see 29-28 Firo. I think Firo wins. And even if Maia does try to wrestle, I kind of think she gets messed up in the clinch here. Firo's pretty dangerous in the clinch and just physically strong for the division. So I don't know how much success Maia would have, if any, getting it to the ground.
Yeah, so I mean, you said it off the bat. Like, I don't think there's any value in Furo at minus 500. I do think it's kind of an interesting case study because Jennifer Maia is someone who's fought the best in the division. She is somebody who's fought for a title. She went the full 25 minutes with Valentina Shevchenko. She won a round against dominant champion. But all that being said, I just don't have that much interest in backing her at plus 350. And, you know, Furo is someone who I've kind of doubted, not necessarily betting against her that often in the UFC. I believe I'd bet Leonardo in her debut, which in hindsight is just like an absolutely brutal bet. But it's not like someone who I'm like going out of my way to fade each time out because I do think she's physical. I think she has a lot of decent tools for this weight class. there's just some troubling tape on her from a long time ago where like she's put on her back in the regional scene. I forget the girl she was fighting in that fight. Maybe it was like Leah McCourt, and she just looked so bad off her back and just consistently made mistakes in that fight. And we haven't really seen her put on her back. And she hasn't been in a position where she's had to defend many takedowns from elite level wrestlers in the UFC. And I will note, I don't think she's going to face that this weekend. Like Jennifer Maia, her best path is probably grappling, and she lands a takedown like every 4 fights. She's not someone who's going to go out there and proactively wrestle. So I don't even think Firo is going to face that sort of issue that I think she may have. And I will give her credit. Sometimes I think we're a little bit hesitant to give fighters as much credit as they deserve for improving throughout the UFC. Like when there's troubling tape for UFC and she hasn't really been tested. Defensive wrestling, offensively wrestling, she's landed a takedown in all of her fights. She's had a couple of impressive double legs that I thought like she was certainly, I didn't think she was capable of prior to the UFC. So I think Firo is improving. I kind of have this overarching theory when it comes to women's MMA, which is like, and this doesn't really necessarily have to do with the betting market in general, but like I don't think it's crazy that she's minus 500 despite the fact that Maya's fought everyone in the division. Because I have this theory that like the women's divisions, specifically MMA as a whole too, but it's so new that I think the fighters are just going to get better so much quicker and consistently. Like I think in 10 years, and this has kind of come to fruition a little bit already with Amanda Nunes, but like I've always been telling my friends, the people I watch MMA with, it's like in 10 years, we're going to look back and laugh at the fact that like Amanda Nunes was ever considered the GOAT, especially in these divisions like 125, 135, 145, just because I think the skill level is so low compared to where it may be in 10 years once people who have kind of grown up doing the sport. Like we've seen the overall skill level of men's fighters at every weight class drastically improve over the last 10 years. You look at every champion now would likely beat the champion from 10 years ago. It's just how the sport has evolved. And women's MMA is still at such a youth level that even though Jennifer Maia has competed against who was the best in the weight class, I think the new wave of fighters at 125, the Tyler Santoses, who I know, John, you're high on, the Manon Firos, I think those women just possess so much more upside than like the old guard at 125 pounds specifically. So long-winded way to say that I don't think any value can be had on Firo at minus 500, but I also don't think it's a situation where you could just say, oh, look, Jennifer Maia's fought everyone in the world. She could grapple here because the fact of the matter is she never grappled. She had the grappling advantage against Chukagian probably her last time out, didn't go to it at all. Like she's just an untrustworthy fighter. So I think Firo covers probably a fade on DraftKings at 9.4K, considering the fact that we have so many fighters on the slate. We think she's most likely to win a decision. That's not something I feel super strongly about, but I do think Firo wins. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a ton of her on DraftKings, but kind of just a long-winded rant there on the evolution of women's MMA, especially at the higher level weight classes. John, if you're ready, we can move on now to the biggest favorite on the card. We got Alexei Kariziev. He's minus 850. I promise I practiced the name like 10 times. It's just a tough one to get down. He's minus 850, a whopping price here in his UFC debut. Coming off of a Contender Series win, he takes on Dennis Julian, who's plus 575. I don't think I nailed his name either. Of note, we have no DraftKings prices for either fighter here. I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show. Not really sure what they're doing as the fight has been announced for, I think, the entirety of the fight week. But look, like Kuriziev is a minus 850 favorite. He went through a Contender Series fight with relative ease. I think he got a submission in under a minute. And John, I'll kind of let you go first here since I've been talking for 5 minutes. But I go back and I watch this tape. I was intrigued originally. I see Tuilian, his plus 500, plus 600 range against a guy who's undersized in his UFC debut. I went back and watched him as tape. This guy might be like one of the worst grapplers on the UFC scene. So I'm curious what you thought kind of going back and looking at the tape prior to the UFC for both of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty simple to me. I'm just not going to overthink it. This dude they're bringing in is like, basically they couldn't get anybody else, so they brought this dude in. I think he trains with Sean Strickland. I think I saw that on Instagram or something, or maybe I heard it in a podcast. I don't know. But basically, he trains with somebody in the UFC. They just bring this dude in on short notice because he was the only one that would accept the fight. But I just think Kizraev just subs him in round one. You saw the little Twitter spat that he gave him. Basically called him a penis and said that he would sub him in one, making fun of the way his name is spelled Dennis, but it's like Denis. Yeah. But yeah, that's basically, I'm just not going to overthink it. Like, I don't think Kizraev is like this super stud prospect. You mentioned he is undersized for the division. I think he previously used to fight at a lower weight class as well on the regional scene. But, he does have some skills, like a typical Russian fighter. He has that solid wrestling, the smothering grappling. And I think this is just a spot where the guy that he's fighting, like regardless of what you think about Kizraev, the guy that he's fighting is just so low level that it almost doesn't even matter. of what you think of Kisraev. Like I think he clearly gets the fight to the ground, and I think he has a significant grappling advantage to where I think he just subs him in round 1, easy game. In terms of the props, like there's no value in it because like I think Kisraev to win in round 1 is minus 125. Because I was looking for like a round 1 prop, a sub 1 prop. They're juiced to the tits. You can't play them. But in terms of DraftKings, I think Kisraev is going to be one of the strongest plays on the board simply because this dude that he's fighting is just simply not good. I mean, he's got a padded record. Most of the guys that he's fought, he has a ton of knockouts, but most of the guys he's fought actually have a losing record. He has no get-up game, poor defensive grappling. It's just like, I mean, come on. Kisraev subs him in 1, easy game, move on.
Fair enough. I don't think I have a ton to add in terms of this fight breaking down. You're like, I don't think Kisraev is necessarily like a blue chip prospect. He's willing to shoot takedowns early and often. He advances position quickly on the mat, looks to finish, which are all good signs. The less good signs with this guy is like he hasn't fought into round 3 more than once in his career, hasn't fought a ton recently. Like I think the price is probably wild for someone who, and the last thing on Kisraev that I forgot to mention, he's undersized for the weight class. Like he's just not that big at middleweight, but I think this is 800, probably crazy on the opposition. Like, yeah, if I had to say there was value on a side, I'd just say it's the underdog because his opponent is just so unproven at this level. But at the same time, like I'd rather just save my money, hope Kisraev gets a first round finish, a first round submission, play him on DK, and then somewhere down the line we fade him because we know he might not have great cardio. We don't really know what his striking looks like. His defense doesn't look great to me, at least in the striking, but I don't think this is the spot. So not a ton of time needed to be spent here. Minus 800 should cover or should win, I should say. Who knows if he covers the price tag per se, but kind of just think it's one of those spots where it's like a total squash match, Bellator prelim-esque, and we can move on here to the next fight of the night, which should hopefully be a little bit more competitive. It is certainly lined as such. We got Dana Batgarel. He is minus 125, 8.5K on DraftKings against Chris Gutierrez, who comes back plus 105, 7.7K for El Guapo in this matchup. And John, I'm going to let you go first here. We know Chris Gutierrez, a habitual leg kicker. We mentioned him earlier as one of the best leg kickers in the sport. He takes on a guy in Batgarel who has shown knockout power, hasn't fought a great level or strength of schedule, I should say, in the UFC, but has passed pretty much every test recently with a knockout. So I'm curious your thoughts here on Batgarel versus Gutierrez.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not betting Chris Gutierrez here, seek help. Like, that's basically what it comes down to for me. Like, I mean, I have a feeling you're going to be joining me. I don't think you've bet it yet because you said you're behind this week, but I have a feeling you're going to be joining me come Saturday. I mean, it's just a spot where, I mean, you have one guy in Bachari, however you pronounce his name, who, yes, he's looked really good, but it's basically all that powerful right hand. And yes, he does have power, but outside of him winning by knockout, like, I really don't see how he wins rounds against Chris Gutierrez. Gutierrez is a guy who I've looked to fade in the past, but that's against guys that I know are going to wrestle, I know are going to force him to grapple, that aren't just going to stand and trade with him. When people stand and trade with him, they get hurt. They can't stand for long because he's chewing up the legs nonstop. The leg kicks are going to be nonstop here against Batchery. Outside of him getting dropped here, I really don't see how he loses. Like, we know Batchery's not going to wrestle him, so we're expecting a standing affair for 15 minutes if it lasts that long. And I think Gutierrez, like, this is going to be a showcase spot for him. I think he's the better striker. The diverse attack with the nonstop leg kicks, he's going to eat up the leg. It's going to make a huge difference. And he's never been knocked out before, so he has the durability to hopefully withstand the punches of Batchery. So I really like the spot here for Gutierrez. I bet him a unit and a half at plus 128. I think on FanDuel was the number. So I'm pretty big on Gutierrez here. I think he's clearly the side, but what do you think, Jonah?
Yeah, so first of all, can you hear me? I tried to reset my Wi-Fi real quick while you were talking. You still got me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
We'll see if that improves the Wi-Fi a little bit. But back to the fight here with Gutierrez. You know, you mentioned at the beginning that you thought I'd be joining you on the train, and I actually did look into this fight a little bit, and I'm not so convinced I'm going to get involved with Gutierrez. You know, I think, John, what number did you get on him earlier this week? Because I know it's coming a little bit.
I think it was plus 128.
Yeah, let me double check. Yeah, plus 128 is what you tracked it at. So, you know, you got a way better number than what's currently available. Like, this is a line that has moved throughout fight week, more specifically today. I know it's plus 122 on FanDuel. Sounds like plus 110 at some of the sharper books. So I certainly think at the price you got him, he was certainly the side and someone that I would have considered betting. And maybe even plus 122 at FanDuel is something that I'll look into. But I do think there are reasons to kind of look at the Becquerel side here as a deserved favorite. I think Becquerel, first of all, this is a fight that I think we can both agree on. No one's going to wrestle in this matchup, John. Like, it's going to be a matchup where both guys are standing Gutierrez's leg kicks against Becquerel's right hand. And look, we're in the big cage, which I think is something that is a huge advantage for Gutierrez. He's a guy who I think thrives in space. But Dana moves forward really well. He pressures well. He pushes guys against the fence well. I will say the one thing that we're kind of working with a lack of information here is Becquerel has not really faced anyone who looked to kick his legs consistently, and we have a large sample of watching it. Like, there's the Guido Canetti fight who kicked his legs a bunch, and I didn't really like the way that Dana looked defending the leg kicks, but he kind of just marched through them, which is something you're able to do early against leg kicks, and then as they kind of add up, it becomes more prohibitive to just march forward against them because you can't put as much pressure on the lead leg, obviously. But in that matchup, like, Becquerel just countered really well off the leg kicks, and I thought that was a spot where he looked decent in. The question is he going to be able to do that if he's not checking leg kicks against Gutierrez in round 2? The answer is likely not. So I understand how you got involved at plus 20, plus 128, plus 130. I'm just not sure that Gutierrez is someone who I want to back at plus 100 against a really good striker. Like, man, I think the boxing discrepancy is pretty big here. Like, I think Becquerel is someone who has way better boxing than Chris Gutierrez. So if they do get into a pocket fight, which I think Chris Gutierrez is smart enough to try to avoid, I favor Becquerel. I think he has more finishing upside. I think his hands are way faster, way cleaner, just in general. So I think Gutierrez has one massive advantage, obviously, which is the leg kicks. But he's so much of a specialist that I just kind of worry if he can't get that game plan going at even money. I feel like he has no fallback option in this matchup. And I think Becquerel is going to be able to push him against the cage and kind of unleash that right hand on him. So I'm not sure I'm going to get on the Chris Gutierrez side. Like I said, John, plus 130 for you. You obviously got the best little number. It was a good read, at least according to the market. But I'm not sure I'm going to get involved in this matchup as much as I wanted you to talk me into a play on the podcast. We may have to wait for something else down the line. Anything else to add here about Becquerel versus Gutierrez, or should we move on?
No, we can move on. But I did forget that I think you backed Donna a couple times, so I forgot he's won you a lot of money in the past. So I think that might be playing into it a little bit. We'll see.
I mean, I think I won on him against not TV Dot. I might have even bet Brandon Davis now that I think about it. And I think I might have lost on Davis. I don't think maybe I won against Canetti or an under in that spot, but he's not like, I try not to let previous results,
I know it was
obviously
just
change
when
the
you were
outlook,
doing the breakdown, I was like, oh yeah, he's won a couple times on Donna. Maybe he doesn't want to fade him here.
Yeah, maybe there's a little, bias in the back of the brain, some subjective bias. But we can move on here to the next matchup. Someone who I can tell you I certainly lost a lot of money on, and that is Sarah Mcmahon. She's a plus 175 underdog this weekend, 7.3K on DraftKings against the favorite, who is Carol Hosa. She's minus 210, $8.9 thousand on DK. And I mean, this is just like the worst possible spot to be in as a bettor. I mean, this is the ultimate hold your nose spot. Like, we look at the NFL sometimes and you'll see like the Chiefs against the Jets, and it'll be like 20.5-point favorites. And yeah, the value may be on the Jets. Even when you're getting 20.5 points, it still feels just so brutal to back someone in that spot, back a team. And that's kind of the theme of this week for me, is there's these underdogs who I think may have value, but it is just so hard to click the submit button. And chief amongst those is Sarah Mcmahon for me, because I actually think stylistically against Carol Hosa, this is a decent matchup for the wrestler and Sarah Mcmahon. We know her game plan. She always goes in, shoots takedowns. She wins basically every first round she's ever been in. She's super dominant in the early rounds. She's also 41 years old and falls apart at the first sight of adversity in most of her fights. And Carol Rojosa, on the other hand, is undefeated in the UFC. She's 4-0. She's been dominant against Vanessa Mello, Jocelyn Edwards, and Beth Correa in her last 3 fights. The problem is none of those ladies are anywhere close to the level of Sarah Mcmahon, especially on the ground. And look, I think Sarah Mcmahon is going to land takedowns in this fight in the first round. I think she's going to get on top. The question is, will Carol Hosa make her face adversity to kind of quit on herself or gas out? Or is Carol Hosa just going to lay on her back? Because if Carol Hosa has no get-up game, I'm pretty positive she's going to get taken down. And I just am so tempted to bet Sarah Mcmahon here at plus 185. She's someone who, yeah, she kind of falls apart in the face of adversity, but she's also lost to some really good fighters. And in her wins, she tends to be super dominant. Like her last 2 wins, which granted come in 2020 and 2017, but in her last 2 wins, she's absorbed a grand total of 1 strike. Like, she's someone who will take you down. And if you have no get-up game, you're going to be underneath Sarah Mcmahon for the entirety of a 15-minute fight. She'll take you down to the beginning of each round, and she will stay on top of you, or she will submit to you from the top. My problem is she's so old. Carol Hosa seems to be improving. I think she's 27 years old, 4-0 in the UFC. There is some tape on Carol Hosa if you go back and watch it, where I think She looked pretty sketchy in the grappling realm on the regional scene. You know, I've seen her on bottom a good amount. She gets on top in fights and then loses position. Like, I don't know. It's one of those situations where the big unknown is how good Carol Hosta will be off her back. We do have a little information for me that makes me think she may struggle a little bit. And we have a lot of information that makes me know that Sarah McMahon is going to get on top early in this fight. But look, if McMahon can't wrestle, there's no point in even talking about the fight. Like, I think Hosta is just going to carve her up at distance. She lands like 7 strikes per minute. It's going to be a complete competitive fight on the feet. But I do expect McMahon to land a takedown at least early in the first round. So, John, like, am I crazy here? I wanted you to talk me into a bet, but I may need you to talk me out of a bet at some point on the card. I'm real tempted. I think there's a plus 185 at bet MGM for Sarah McMahon. I may sacrifice a unit on that. Am I out of my mind? Should I not hit the submit button, or do I maybe have a little bit of sense in me this weekend?
I mean, that's the problem, right? It's like, how much money have we collectively lost on Sarah McMahon on this podcast? Like we've literally bet her, I think, like every single fight, and it's like
In fairness, she hasn't fought recently outside the Pena. I mean, the Pena fight is, well, that's the champion, but outside the Pena fight, like, she hadn't been fighting a lot, which was good for her bankroll because the more she fights, the more we lose.
And every time she fights, she's usually an underdog, and we're like, oh, bet Sarah McMahon, the Olympic level wrestler. She's gonna take her down. She's gonna win round 1. She's probably going to win round 2, and she has to stay alive in round 3. Problem is she just doesn't seem to stay alive. Like, I think she probably gets Hosta down early here, wins the first round. Outside of that, I don't really know what's going to happen here. I think it's one of those spots where it's like, it's hard to tell if there's value on the money line because the risk of her falling off a cliff after 7.5 minutes and just getting killed after that is pretty high. So I don't know. I would say I'm just as tempted as you to lose more money on Sarah McMahon, but at the same time, I'm like, I know I'm like already tilting for not betting her right now.
Right.
And then I'm going to watch the fight play out. She's just going to be in top position, and I'm going to be like, why didn't I bet her? I'm an idiot. And then if I do bet her, I'm just going to wait until like the second or third round and then tilt my face off when she gets knocked out or submitted. So I don't know. I think obviously it's a good live spot for Carol Hosta. I think everybody understands that. But, you know, clear striking advantage. Obviously, the wrestling is the advantage for McMahon. I think she does get this fight to the ground. Hosta has, like, statistically speaking, strong takedown defense, but she hasn't faced anybody even half the level of a wrestler as McMahon. I think she has, like, a 90-plus takedown defense, but it was against, like, I mean, nobody that even has like competent wrestling, let alone Olympic level wrestling like McMahon. So I do think McMahon has some success early here. It's just a matter of how soon she tends to fall off that cliff. Now she's like turns 42 later this year. I don't know, man. I already have a big bet on a 41-year-old that we'll talk about in a few fights. I don't know if I can do two fighters that are over the hill this week, but we'll see.
Yeah, man. I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's like, I don't want to spend too much more time on this fight because I think our take is pretty clear. But it's like, even in your breakdown here, and you talk about the fight, John, like the first thing you said was basically, I think McMahon's going to get her down early, and then I don't know what's going to happen after that. And I feel like if the one thing we're certain of is that she's going to land a takedown as a plus 185 favorite in the first round and may just be able to do that in every round, and it would be foolish not to bet her. But, you know, context is necessary in these situations. We got to realize who we're betting on. And yeah, you mentioned Hosa, like 90% statistically takedown defense. I think the only takedown she's conceded is like Jocelyn Edwards at the end of a round, if I can remember correctly. So, I mean, it's a small sample. Like, if she's given up one takedown, that's what? Like, she's stuffed 10 of 11 takedowns is my guess in the UFC. And that is just like not a good sample, especially against an Olympic wrestler like Sarah McMahon. So maybe we'll lose a little bit more money this weekend on Sarah McMahon. Stay tuned for that in the FTN bets tracker. Seems likely at this point, but you never know. Things change. That's the first 41-year-old we'll talk about. We'll get to another one in a little bit on the main card. But before we get there, we got to talk about Neil Magne versus Max Griffin, which goes down this weekend. Magne currently minus 250 favorite. Griffin comes back plus 200. And DraftKings prices here of Magne 8.8K, Griffin 7.4K. And this is just a fight where I kind of feel this way about a lot of the card this weekend. I just think it's priced like pretty accurately, and there's no number that gives me any interest in getting involved in the betting market. Like, I think it's going to be an entertaining fight. This is a card where I think it'll be more fun to watch than it will be to bet on, at least in my opinion, just because I feel like the market is efficient. And maybe I feel that way because the first time I really looked at lines was late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, when usually I make most of my bets on Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday during the week. But at this point, Neil Magny minus 250 feels about right to me. Max Griffin has looked better recently, especially his striking. He had a knockout 2 fights ago where kind of just put his opponent away early. Saw Kanan in that fight, a guy who was lower than Max Griffin's level, but handled him accordingly. And then the Carlos Condit fight, his last time out, like Max Griffin knocked down Carlos Condit. He won a pretty dominant decision. He landed 28 leg kicks in that fight, which was certainly an impressive metric for him. And noteworthy, a tool that Neil Magny has kind of struggled against defending leg kicks throughout his career. But at the same time, Neil Magny is just one of those guys who, if you're not game planning perfectly for him, you're going to fall into his trap. You're going to end up clinched against the fence. You're going to have to deal with his length. And I just think Neil Magny is going to be able to counter wrestle a little bit in this matchup. I think he might be a little more likely to land takedowns. I think he's clearly the better striker. So I think there are some things that Max Griffin can do to keep this fight pretty competitive, if not win it. Shoot a lot of takedowns in this spot. Chew up the leg as often and early as possible. But honestly, I think that this looks like mostly every other Neil Magny fight in the world, which is clinch fest, where his opponent slows down late on. Neil Magny wins round 3, gets one of the first 2 rounds, and wins a pretty clear but competitive decision. So I'll pick like Magny 29-28, maybe a 30-27. I think it won't be a blowout, but at minus 250, it just seems accurate to me. I have no interest in betting the fight currently. Jon, anything for you here in Magny versus Griffin?
Yeah, I basically have the same exact take. Neil Magny's been like a cash cow. You always make fun of me where I have like 3 or 4 UFC fighters where every time they're on the card, I'm like, oh, bet him by decision. Neil Magny was one of those guys for me. I've hit the decision prop on like 3 of his fights. But this is really the same thing. I think he wins a competitive but clear decision, maybe a 29-28. The only worry here is like the power of Max Griffin. He has landed like 6 knockdowns in the UFC. Like, he does have power. I'm not going to understate that, but Magny's historically durable. I think he's a lot more technical, where Griffin has the power and maybe the aggressiveness. Neil Magny has the technique and the experience, and I think the wrestling advantage as well. You mentioned, like, I could see him clinching up against the fence against Griffin, having some success there. At range, I think Magny's jab's going to be a big difference here. So I think it's a 29-28 Neil Magny decision. Instead of backing him at minus 250, just chop that price in half, play him by decision. I didn't bet him this week, but that's because it's like minus 125, and in a fight where I think it's going to be, I think it could be a little bit more competitive than a minus 250 would indicate, but I don't know. We'll see if I'll go back to the Neil Magny by decision train, but I think he does win a decision here.
Yeah, I mean, historically, a really durable guy is Max Griffin. His only finish loss comes to Colby Covington. So if you're betting Magny, I think that is probably a decent way to do it. Not a spot that I'm looking to get involved in, as I kind of think everything is priced accurately. But Jon, good shout from you there, as Griffin is a tough guy to put away, and Magny is a guy who, I don't know, you would make a joke about him being unable to finish. Maybe you made it just now. I was too busy betting Villanova. But Neil Magny, a guy who does not finish fights, and Max Griffin, a guy who doesn't get finished. So if you're interested in the Magny side, maybe a buy decision. A by decision prop makes sense in this matchup. Let's move on to the next fight prior to the main card here. Interesting matchup here. We got Slavaklaus, Vyacheslav Borishev. He comes in as a small favorite. He's minus 145, 8.7K off of a quick turnaround after beating Dakota Bush. His last time out, he takes on the bone crusher Mark Diakisi, who comes back plus 125, 7.5K. And Borishev is a good striker. Let me just start my breakdown by saying that, not to state the obvious, but this is a guy who, in both of his fights, I've been really impressed with the way he strikes in space. He's a guy who doesn't need a lot of space nor time to put the hurt on his opponents. Both of his fights being a Contender Series and then his UFC debut. Diakise, just 29 years old, but feels a lot older than that. He's been around for long time. Guy who feels just super inconsistent. I never know what type of performance I'm going to get out of him. His last matchup, I was there in the Apex against Rafael Alves. I had a bet on Diakise. Got kicked in the dick like the first minute of the fight, maybe the first kind of first big action of the fight was he took a low blow. I just seemed to never get in the fight after that. Got finished or got dropped and then guillotine or rocked, then guillotine shortly thereafter in that matchup. He's fought a really tough strength of schedule. That's something we got to give Diakise credit for. Like, he's fought, his losses in the UFC have been Alves, who, I don't think is great, but certainly dangerous in the first round. Fiziev, who I think is bordering on a top 10 spot in this weight class. And then like Nasrat Haqparast, who at one point was a highly touted prospect. And then like Drakkar Klose and Dan Hooker, who are, probably top 15, top 20 guys in the weight class. Dan Hooker, by the way, that was a sad scene at UFC London last weekend. But I just think that Borishev is a pretty good striker in space here. I think he's going to win the striking against Diakise. Question for me is, how likely is Mark Diakise to wrestle? This is a guy who is able to wrestle a little bit. I think he lands upwards of 2 takedowns in the UFC throughout his career, which is a big sample. So a guy who's going to go to it early and often. The problem is doesn't have a great top game, and Borishev is someone who I think his get-up game is actually pretty solid. We talked about this a lot prior to his UFC debut, where I thought Dakota Bush would be able to get him down, but the problem would be, could he hold him down? And Dakota Bush took him down 2 times in 3 minutes, but that means 2 things. First of all, Borshev's takedown defense is really no good. We kind of knew that coming into the fight. To get taken down twice in 3 minutes, you have to have pretty poor takedown defense, but it also means you have to get up once. And in this case, he got up twice since he got up and then won via knockout afterwards. I think he actually has a pretty decent get up game. I think Diakise, if he's able to implement a wrestling game plan, is going to have to land multiple takedowns potentially per round here. So I had some interest in Diakise. You know, I think he's going to be a little bit competitive on the feet. I think he has wrestling upside in this matchup against kind of a guy who's a D level grappler, most likely. The prices come in so much early in the week. Like there were plus 170s and plus 150s out there on Diakise, and now it's like plus 120. I see a plus 135 is the best available price currently at Caesar Sportsbook, and that's just not enough meat on the bone for me when I'm not even sure Diakise is going to be able to wrestle consistently. I think he's at a striking disadvantage, but at the same time, can I really lay chalk on a guy in Borishev who like gets taken down twice per round so far in the UFC? It's just hard for me to wrap my head around that. So maybe Borishev by KO, Borishev on DraftKings, I'm sure will be a pretty popular play, but a long-winded breakdown for me to say I think the price started out with value on Diakise. I think it's kind of compressed now to somewhere close to accurate. So I'll pick Borishev to win. I think he does it by knockout this weekend. John, did you by any chance get in on the early Diakise price? And if not, is there anything you're looking to bet in this matchup, or is it just kind of a complete pass on your end as well?
Yeah, I kind of see it going the same way as you. Maybe Diakise has some success with the wrestling, and I think he does probably land multiple takedowns here, but I also kind of think he loses because Slava, I think, clearly is the better striker here. I think he's clearly more powerful, more finishing upside as well. And then it's like, if he gets taken down once or twice, you mentioned it, his get-up game is not bad. It wasn't bad on the regional scene, but it looks to be more improved. You know, training at Team Alpha Male, there's some decent wrestlers there. I know he's trying to improve that. Obviously, he has the high-level striking, former Glory kickboxing champion, I want to say. Or maybe it's a Russian kickboxing champion. I can't remember.
I'm not sure that Borishev was ever in Glory. I can double check it for you, but I don't think he was.
Too many Dana White Contender Series
fighters
that I got to break down. But I think he was a Russian kickboxing champion, I want to say. But either way, high-level striker. I think he's going to be winning the striking minutes here. Like I said, I think he has more potential to hurt Diakise. But Diakise is historically pretty durable. So I actually have Slava winning a decision here. I think he wins 2 out of 3 rounds, if not all 3. Diakise, I think, does land a takedown or 2, but like you said, I don't think he has much control time here. I don't think he threatens with the submission. It's just kind of like, I think, yeah, he lands a takedown or 2. Maybe there's value if for those that got in early, but I also just think he loses. I think Slava gets a decision here. I think Slava's the better striker. I think there's probably a better spot to fade Slava in the future against somebody a little bit more trustworthy than Diakise, who's been kind of hot and cold in the UFC based on what we've seen out of him.
Any interest in you, John, in playing the fight goes to decision at plus 150 or an over 2.5 at plus 134 on FanDuel, if that's your take on the fight?
Plus 150 goes to decision sounds interesting.
Right. I mean, you're picking it to go to decision, and you're getting like what,
like
40% implied. So if people agree with John's take, and I'm not sure I have a super strong take in terms of the total here, but obviously you seem to think it goes to decision. Plus 150 is a pretty good number, I think. That is over at FanDuel Sportsbook right now, so maybe take a piece of that. I don't know what Borishev decision is. I'd have to look it up, but probably a decent spot as well. And another way to approach that, John, like for the people, would just be being underweight on Borishev. Like he figures to be one of the more, he's a guy who's come into the UFC, gets multiple knockouts on Contender Series debut, medium-sized favorite in this matchup. It's certainly favorite 10 inside the distance. Maybe a way to kind of leverage your position here is just get underweight on him on DraftKings, right? Like you think he wins, but we know that striking-based decisions in this day of DFS really give you nothing at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a decent way to play it. Next fight up is the 41-year-old that John is interested in betting this weekend. We got Alexei Olynyk. He's plus 170. He's $7.6 thousand against Ilir Latifi, who's minus 200, 8.6K. And I like to introduce every fight, but the only thing I can really say here is like this is just an absolute complete shit show. I don't know if I'm like troubled or entertained by the fact that you're like excited to talk about the fight, John. It seems like just such an easy push away pass for me that I just don't even want to say anything about the fight. I know you have a play on it. You feel strongly about it. So the floor is yours, my friend. Talk to us about Olynyk versus Latifi.
Yeah, it's funny. When I teased that I bet like somebody north of 40, I was actually talking about Matt Brown. I completely forgot about the Alexei Olynyk. So I've already bet two people over 40. Now
Olynyk
considering
might be
McMahon,
50 at this point.
yeah, McMahon, that I mean that'd be three people that are like, I mean, almost old enough to be, well, definitely old enough to be your parents, but almost old enough to be my parents. But I don't know if I can do
Yeah.
it. I'm on Olynyk by first round sub here at plus 750, and this is one where it's like it's just a big number for me. I understand Latifi's never been submitted in his career, but you're gonna give me plus 750 on like basically Olynyk's not only path to victory here, but definitely a lot of his path to victory is an early submission. He doesn't have the cardio to go a hard 15. We know that. Obviously, he could get knocked out here, but it's just a spot where, you know, it's similar to like the Paul Craig thing. Like we cashed on Paul Craig plus 420 submission last week, where it's like, yeah, he might not win, but I think he's going to have opportunities to cash that ticket. I kind of see this being a similar spot because Ilir Latifi, yes, he can knock out Olynyk on the feet. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. But we've seen, you know, he's going to mix in the takedowns. I think he takes Olynyk down here. I think Olynyk is going to have opportunities. Obviously, I'd prefer Olynyk to be the one landing takedowns. He's a lot more dangerous when he's in top position. But if Ilir Latifi, I know he's never been subbed. I know he's a solid grappler, whatever. If he's going to take the fight to the ground against Alexei Olynyk, I'm just going to take a plus 750 to see if Olynyk gets the sub in round one. So that's the way I played it. I think he has more upside on DraftKings as well. My guy Philly Dilly says can't choke a guy with no neck. That is a valid point. But again, I mean, I just go back to the number. Like, you're going to give me plus 750 on a guy that has so many dangerous chokes on the mat, and I think the guy who he's fighting is going to try to take it to the mat. I'm just going to take the shot pretty much every single time. So not a super, like, deep breakdown for me. It's just like, you give me that number, I'm just going to take it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you can't really argue with Alexei Olynyk plus 750 in round one by submission. And he's also a guy who doesn't need his opponent to have a neck. Like, next thing you know, he'll be armbarring him from guard or some sort of unorthodox choke where I don't even know. But I think there's certainly several paths to getting a submission here. This is just a fight I mentioned I don't really want any interest in. I think a way I might kind of get some action per se down on the fight is just kind of being underweight on DraftKings. You know, this fight is scheduled 10 inside the distance. I kind of favor it to go the distance, and I'm hesitant to bet it despite the fact that, you know, there's perceived value on the number. I think plus 155 to go the distance over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Like Alexei Olynyk, historically a guy who's always been like, you know, submission victory or knockout loss, and he's been like that for basically the last 70 years, every single one of his fights. But as we're ending towards the back end of his career, or what we might think will be the back end of his career, he's allegedly 44. Some theorize he may be older than that. I feel like the pace of his fights have kind of slowed down a little bit. If his opponent isn't pushing a real pace, I don't really think that Olynyk is going to go out there and put himself in as much danger as he was earlier on in his career. And we've just seen kind of Ilir Latifi, especially since his move to heavyweight, has just been throwing no volume. Like, he threw 5 strikes against Derek Lewis, or I should say landed 10 strikes against Tanner Boser. Both those fights went 15 minutes. Like, I think there's a decent chance that these guys just stare at each other, and then maybe like Latifi gets a late takedown and lies on top while Olynyk tries to like throw up guard subs unsuccessfully. So I do think if I had to make a play on the fight, I'd just rather bet it to go the distance at plus 150. But it's just one of those fights where I don't have to bet it, so I don't think I will. And hopefully everyone goes overweight in DFS, and I'm just going to sit out on the sidelines, hope it goes to a sloppy decision. The winner literally could score like 45, 50 points on DraftKings here. That's how low volume I think it'll be prior to getting a decision. So that's my thoughts on the fight here at heavyweight. We can now move all the way down to the flyweights. Really exciting fight here. We got Askar Askarov, who's minus 410, $9.1 thousand on DK against Kai Kara France. Big underdog is France. He's plus 310, 7.1K. This fight, I would think, is to get the winner of the fourth matchup between Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo. That was just tentatively announced. Two of the guys that are top 5 in the division. Obviously, Kai Kara France coming off of a career-defining victory over Cody Garbrandt. Maybe not career-defining. Biggest win of his career to date. And then Askar Askarov on the other side, a guy who's been impressive since getting into the UFC, drew with Brandon Moreno and has since beat, you know, Tim Elliott, Alexandre Pantoja, and then really dominated Joseph Benavidez in a fight where I bet Benavidez his last time out. So a guy in Askar Askarov has been impressive to this point. He's a minus 400 favorite in this spot. I've seen a lot of people with interest in Kai Kara France. John, I think you may be one of them. I saw a prop that you at least sprinkled on the Kai Kara France side earlier this week. But for me, I think this price is, you know, fairly accurate. Askar Askarov is a guy who we've seen wrestle in almost all of his fights. The Tim Elliott fight is the only one where his opponent was really looking to start the wrestling, but Askar Askarov was still able to compete in the grappling. He was someone who had success on the ground, reversal, sweeps, all that good stuff. And against Pantoja, he wrestled Benavidez. He kind of dominated. You dominate Joe Benavidez like that. I don't care what age Joe Benavidez is. I don't care who he's lost to or been massacred by in the Davison Figueiredo fight. I was really impressed with the way that Askar Askarov was just kind of able to dominate him in pretty much every phase of MMA in that matchup. And I like Kara France a lot. I think he carries a decent amount of power for flyweight, throws a good amount of volume, has historically has good takedown defense, but kind of think he's up against it this weekend. I've heard some people with takes that he's going to make it a closer fight than this, and just don't see it. I made Askarov about a minus 400 favorite prior to looking at the lines this week, and I think he's going to wrestle here. I think the striking is not as much of a blowout in Kara France's favor as many want you to believe. I, in fact, might even favor Askarov on the feet with the idea that he has that wrestling to fall back on, the threat of the wrestling to utilize. So I don't know, not a hot take for me at minus 400, but I think Askarov is going to win this fight. If you're going to play France, I think a prop market is a decent way to do it. I don't want to steal your thunder here, John, so I'll just kick it over to you. I know you like the France side a little bit more than I do. Talk to me about what you played this week in this fight.
Yeah, it's kind of just another spot where it's like, you give me that big of a number, I'm going to have a little bit of interest. I played just half a unit on Kara France by knockout at plus 750. So 750 is my number this week. First round Olynyk sub 750, Kara by knockout 750. But honestly, like I really like, obviously if Askarov, like, he's gonna have a wrestling advantage here. That's the key fighting Kara France, is like, you take this guy down. If you can control him, you're gonna win minutes here. And I think Askarov can at least partially do that. But I also think Kara France could maybe keep this striking more than people expect. Like, I think people are giving Askarov a little bit too much credit. Like, it's not like he's like this next level smother grappler, like he's just gonna hold him down for 15 minutes, right? That type of deal. Like, and that's where I think I differ a little bit from the market, is like where he's priced at, you're expecting him to land 3+ takedowns and just 10 minutes plus of control time, I'd say. And I don't know, man. I have a hard time seeing that. And a guy like Kara France, who I think has much better footwork, I think he's much faster. He's going to beat him to the punch. But it's really the footwork. He does have solid takedown defense as well. Like, I do think Askarov is going to have some success wrestling, but I don't think it's going to come as easily as other people think. I am still picking Askarov, or Askarov. There's another Askar in the UFC, so I had to make sure I wasn't swapping that. But Askarov, I do expect to have success with the wrestling. I think this fight is going to play out closer than people think. I'm picking Askarov to win a decision here, but I did sprinkle the KO prop on Kara France. If you are on the Kara France side, I think that would be the way to target him, just because he's one of the biggest hitters at 125. And I think, while Askarov has proven so far, at least, to be pretty durable, he's super durable and can't get knocked out until it actually happens. And at plus 750, I'm willing to take at least just a small chance to see if that can come to fruition here on Kara France.
Fair enough. Let's move on to another closely lined fight here. We got Brian Barbarena and Matt Brown. Dead pick'em currently minus 115 apiece. Current DK prices of Brown 8.2K, Brian Barbarena 8K, I should say, flat in this matchup. And this is another one where I just kind of looked at it, crossed it off the bet list, wasn't really interested in playing it. Turned on the FTN bets tracker to see what John might be interested in prior to getting on the show with him. And I mean, John, you were just like 10 times more fun than me this week. I mean, I'm just out here like, oh yeah, I think this fight is a pass. Like, these are two guys who are untrustworthy. They're old. They're not that durable. And you're just out here like firing at every single angle. So you were just way more fun than me today. Maybe more fun than me in general, but certainly today. I'm just gonna let you have the floor here. I know you have a bet on Matt Brown. We already buried the lead a little bit earlier on. Curious your thoughts on the matchup here.
Yeah, so for starters, I feel like it's always easier to fire on your leans after you have a big week, right? Like, I'm firing on these big long shot props. Obviously I hit a couple of them last week, so it's a little bit easier to do that. Whereas, after when I was on that super cold prop streak, I was a little bit more, responsible on picking those long shot props. So, I mean, maybe that's a part of it, but honestly, it's like, you break down these fights every single week. you just got to trust your gut. And I think that's what I'm doing here with Matt Brown. I backed him at the money line. I do have some interest in the knockout prop as well at plus 180. I think plus 175 is still available on FanDuel, but I backed him at the money line. It's a pick 'em now. I think some books you could actually get like a little bit minus 105 maybe. I don't think there's any plus money out there, but on FanDuel I actually thought it was moving in his favor, so I guess a bad entry at minus 114, so slightly bad there on my part. But I bet Matt Brown to win a unit and a half here, and this is a spot where you definitely have concerns on both sides. Like obviously Matt Brown, he retired like back in 2017. He's literally has died before. You know, they call him the immortal, but he's died before. He's been knocked out multiple times. The durability is a concern. Like there's obviously concerns. I'm not doubting that. But on the Bryan Barbarena side, I'm actually more concerned about Bryan Barbarena. This guy has looked like a shell of himself over his last couple fights. Like since he's had multiple big injuries and surgeries, he has not looked the same whatsoever. This is a guy that's made a name for himself on being super durable, high volume striker that's willing to just slug it out with anybody. And then it's like we've seen time and time again, those type of fighters, it's like eventually the durability goes. And not just like the chin durability for him, but like the body damage is like breaking down. Like he's had multiple surgeries. He has not looked the same. Like anybody that says he has, I mean, I don't know what you're smoking, but I mean, his last couple fights, like he went life and death with Jason Witt. Shout out to the Vanilla Gorilla. Obviously, we're Witt guys on this show, but I mean, he was taken down 8 times in that fight. Obviously, Witt has really strong wrestling, but the takedown defense of Barbarena has never been good. That's always been a leak in his game. Like he has very poor takedown defense. Witt took him down 8 times, dropped him a couple times, was doing the stanky leg. Then he gets a fight against Darian Weeks, who's basically a Contender Series guy who I bet against on Contender Series, coming in on 4 days notice. And I won't say he goes life and death with him, but it was a 29-28. Like it was a close competitive decision. Weeks took him down 4 times as well, and Weeks isn't some stud wrestler either. And it's like every fight now, Barbarena is like getting stung on the feet. Now we have Matt Brown, who since coming back from his retirement, since knocking out Diego Sanchez, has basically every fight that he's fighting in is ending inside the distance. I think that's what happens here. He's back in Columbus, in his hometown in Ohio. I think he has more finishing upside than Barbarena. I think that's pretty clear. Obviously, I'd favor Barbarena if this fight went a full 15 minutes, but I don't think it does here. I think this fight ends early. I think Matt Brown has much more finishing equity. I think he could potentially have a path to victory with the wrestling. I'm not expecting him to wrestle. He averages like 1.5 takedowns per 15, but I'm just saying, like, if he did pursue takedowns, I think he can get a takedown or two here just because the takedown defense of Barbarena is so poor. But it's really just, I keep going back to the finishing upside and how bad Barbarena has regressed, in my opinion. So I back Matt Brown here. I know some people might think it's a little bit sketchy, but maybe it is. We'll see. But I think Matt Brown wins by knockout here. I really do.
Yeah, and I obviously respect your opinion and respect your breakdown of the fight, especially because it's a fight that I haven't thought that much about. Like I mentioned, one of those where, I'll just mention like the things that made me cross it off my list just for like context, like Matt Brown, someone who obviously getting up there in age. The Diego Lima fight, I didn't think he looked very good in that fight. Was getting his leg kicked and then obviously gets the knockout. Kind of a slow paced fight where I thought neither guy was looking great, if I'm honest. And then prior to that, he obviously lost to Condit. The Baeza fight where he just got absolutely annihilated at that age is oftentimes fights that guys don't come back from. And then with Bryan Barbarena, like you did a great job outlining why I'm not betting him in this spot. Like the Jason Witt fight, hey, I love Jason Witt. Credit to him for landing 8 takedowns. Jason Witt shouldn't really ever be dropping you in a fight. You know what I mean? Like that was certainly a sign for Bryan Barbarena with all the injuries he's had that, hey, this is a guy who once relied on his durability, was going like life and death with guys way better than him. Just based off of his durability and ability to kind of get in dogfights. And the Jason Witt fight just kind of like completely erased that for me. Darian Weeks took him down a bunch. Like you mentioned, I think Matt Brown could wrestle here. I'm not so sure he will at this point in his career. Just not something that he's gone to super often. Look, I'll side with you. I'll pick Matt Brown just for fun because I like the guy. I think it's a home game for him in Ohio as well. Hopefully she gets some crowd support. But it's a fight that I'm not interested in betting. A pick 'em seems about right. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if like either guy goes out there and drops the other one 3 times and route to a first round finish. Like it just feels like a volatile spot. So not even a volatile spot where I want to be on the under or anything. So no bet for me here, John. I think you outlined the reasoning for backing Matt Brown pretty well. So I'll be rooting for you this weekend, and hopefully that 1.5 unit bet comes through for you. 2 fights left here for UFC Columbus. We got the co-main event here. Alexei Grasso versus Joanne Wood. Currently have Grasso as a minus 250 favorite. She's 9K flat on DK, and Joanne Wood is $7,200 on DraftKings. And this is a spot where I've talked a few times about there being fights where I kind of crossed them off the list because I didn't think either guy or girl was super trustworthy, and I just didn't really necessarily want to get involved in the betting market at all. This is one of those spots where I actually thought a decent amount about the fight, and I kind of just think that Alexei Grasso has her covered. And then I looked at the betting odds, and the reason I'm not betting it is I think the price is just kind of accurate. It is hard to cover a minus 250, minus 300 in women's MMA, especially when you don't wrestle a ton. But you just look at Joanne Calderwood recently, the Lauren Murphy fight. Obviously, I actually scored the fight for her, but she didn't look great in that fight. I expected her to look even better than she did on the feet. Tyler Santos fight obviously got like completely annihilated. That might be something that I was talking about earlier on the show, where it's like these new wave of women's 125ers. I just think are like way better than the old guard. We know what Joanne Wood's going to go out there and give us. Like, she's going to go through 100 strikes per minute. She's going to get hit a lot. Maybe has some success in the clinch. Pretty poor grappler when people take her down. I don't think she has much wrestling upside. And technically boxing, like, could she make the fight close against Alexei Grasso because they each throw 150 strikes? Like, yeah, theoretically she could, but I just think Grasso is so much better than her in terms of like the technical boxing and the power behind her shots. Like, Joanne Wood, those what's really the definition of empty volume. Like, she really just throws strikes, light kicks that are scored for DraftKings. They're scored for UFC stats, but they're not really damaging strikes in the eyes of the judges. And I think that's kind of the reason why she's lost some of these competitive decisions before. So I don't know. I just think Grasso is younger, better, and I think she deserves to be minus 250. It's just hard to lay prices like minus 250 when she's not going to wrestle, because a lot of her wins could be like outstriking her opponent 150 to 120 in this spot. And yeah, it might be clear, but it could still be, sketchy, or if someone trips and falls at the end of the round, it could swing it. Like, I don't think it's going to be dominant from Alexei Grasso. I just think she's better in every facet of the game right now. So I'll pick Grasso to win. 9K on DraftKings is not someone who I'm going to be super excited to play just because we know she doesn't wrestle. But this is a fight, like, if you're playing underdog, prize picks, any of that stuff, I think it's pretty, I don't want to say like pretty likely, but I think there's a chance we get into one of those fights where women's MMA, each fighter lands like 200 significant strikes. Like, I think it could be one of those wars where you're just playing like overs everywhere on significant strikes. And we know on DraftKings that doesn't score great. You get like 0.4 points per significant strike. So you really have to land like 200 for it to be a good score if you're not going to grapple. So I'm not sure I have a ton of interest in DFS, but in some of those prop markets, like I think overs on Joanne Wood and Alexei Grasso are probably good. I expect them to just kind of slug it out on the feet for the entirety of the 15 minutes. I'll pick Grasso this weekend, but no value in the betting market for me. John, anything for you in the co-main event?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because my underdog video released earlier today, and I bet Joanne Wood over 75.5 significant strikes. It's up. They moved it quite a bit after I bet it, and I think a few other people did as well. Now it's up to like 85.5. Honestly, I could see her going over that. Like you said, like, I think this is one where maybe both girls go over 100 significant strikes. But I just think at 75.5, there's just a lot of value at that number. So if you got in that early, props to you guys. Check out that underdog video, please. I definitely appreciate it. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm a little more confident on the Alexei Grasso side. Before I get into it, Rogue Streamer said Grasso is overrated, Jonas Shiffman. So he used your full name like he was your teacher.
Hey,
Jonas Shiffman.
No one's got a bigger crush on Alexei Grasso than me. No one's got a bigger crush on her than me. I'm a longtime Alexei Grasso supporter. So yeah, maybe I'm a little bit biased in that sense, but I don't know. Just at this point, Joanne Calderwood's career, I feel like she just doesn't have much for Grasso. But I digress. Back to you, John.
Yeah, so I put that out there because he's gonna come at me. Maybe he used my full name next, because I'm totally with you. I'm big on Alexei Grasso here. I backed Alexei Grasso to win by decision or points on FanDuel at minus 130. Like, she's minus 250 favorite. Cut that price in half, better by decision. She's not finishing Joanne Wood. Joanne Wood, I don't think, is finishing her. And this is a spot where, similar to the Molly McCann, Luana Carolina striking dynamic, where you have one fighter who you put it perfectly. It's empty volume a lot on the Joanne Wood side. And, I'm a big Joanne Wood fan over the last, years, whatever. But this is not a good matchup for her. She's going to be spamming those leg kicks, but she's going to be being backed up, and she's going to be losing minutes in the striking because of the boxing of Alexa Grasso. She's much quicker. She's got better footwork. I think she has more power as well. It's just a spot where I think Grasso's clearly winning the striking, and I'm not really expecting either fighter to wrestle here. So it's just a spot like Joanne Wood, I think, is clearly fading. She's up to like 35 or something years old now, lost 3 of her last 4 fights, and now she's facing somebody who I think is just much faster, who's going to beat her to the punch, better footwork, and going to be landing the more significant strikes in the eyes of the judges. So I like Alexa Grasso here. I backed her to win by decision, and then she's in my Juice Boy Chalk Boy parlay as well.
Juice Boy Chalk Boy is the funny name for the weekly, what seems to be the new weekly parlay. But hey, can't hate if you're winning. So hopefully keep that up. Hopefully Grasso gets it done for you this week, and I'll certainly be rooting for her. As I already mentioned, I do have a crush on Alexa Grasso. It is known at this point, despite what the YouTube chat may think. I am an Alexa Grasso fan. I always have been. I always will be. Let's move on here to the main event. We got the heavyweights, John Curtis Blades, minus 410. 9.2K on DraftKings against Chris Daukaus, plus 310, 7K. And these are two guys who are kind of at weird points in their career. I don't want to call it a crossroads because I think that might be an overreaction. But Curtis Blades is someone who I think was clearly moving towards a title shot at heavyweight, gets knocked out by Derek Lewis. I don't want to call it a lucky punch, but against the run of play, as they would say in soccer, someone who was Curtis Blades, I wouldn't say dominating the fight, but having a lot of success, then gets kind of knocked out of nowhere. Beats Jairzinho Rozenstruik his last time out, but it's kind of in this weird spot where it's like Stipe, John Jones, Cyril Gane, Francis Ngannou, Aspinall all kind of exist above him right now in terms of like what's hot in the heavyweight division, but Blades is kind of beating everybody below him. And then with Chris Daukaus, he was the guy who, like, we were making fun of him fighting Parker Porter in his first UFC fight. It was like a funny fight because it was like 265-pound big white dudes. And then it's like, oh shit, he won 4 fights in a row. And then it's like, holy shit, he's a favorite in the main event to Derek Lewis. And then he gets knocked out by Derek Lewis. So 2 guys who I think are kind of at weird points in their career here. Blades is obviously a massive favorite, as we've seen him in pretty much every one of his UFC fights to date, outside of the, super high level guys he's fought. I'm picking Curtis Blades to win. I will say this. Curtis Blades is someone who I have a long time kind of gone to bat for, said I would favor him potentially in a third fight with Ngannou, despite losing the first 2 by knockout. Someone who I said I think has the best skill set at heavyweight. Someone who I said would go out and dominate the likes of an Alexander Volkov type of guy. And while I was right in a lot of those facets, he just hasn't quite looked the same to me recently. And I did lose a max bet against on him, I should say, against Derek Lewis. And I honestly don't really regret the bet. Like, I do think that Blades wins that fight 8, 9 times out of 10. Credit to Derek Lewis for timing the uppercut and getting the knockout, obviously. But Blades has just kind of been a little underwhelming to me. And I know it's been a small sample, not only since then, but even before then at the end of the Volkov fight when he was slowing down a bit. The Rozenstruik fight specifically for Blades was, I was tempted to bet him at minus 250, and I think he covered his price. But it just didn't feel like it was the same enthusiastic guy as we've seen before. Like, this is a guy who at heavyweight has decent cardio and lands almost 7 takedowns per 15 minutes. Like, that is an insane skill set to have in a division where most guys can't even grapple to begin with. But against Rozenstruik, he just seems so tentative to like expend energy on top. Like, he was getting into great positions and throwing almost no ground and pound, like even total strikes, not even significant strikes. Like, he just wasn't throwing a ton. He didn't look as ferocious on the ground in terms of those elbows. On the feet, he looked tentative, and I get it, right? Like, you just got absolutely annihilated by Derek Lewis. But I think part of the reason why I rated Curtis Blades so highly is because he knew his skill set. He would go out there, take guys down, and just absolutely mash on them. And now it feels like he's going out there trying to not get knocked out. And then if he gets the takedown, he just doesn't want to gas out once he gets there. And like I said, it's a small sample. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope Curtis Blades goes back out to his normal self. He's only 31 for heavyweight. I hope he goes out there, gets on top of Chris Daukaus, and wins the fight in devastating fashion. But I just haven't loved the visual I've seen. That being said, Chris Daukaus is a guy who I never really believed in terms of like title aspirations in this weight class. I think he needs an early knockout. He does have decent speed for a heavyweight. I think that's certainly his best tool in his toolbox. But we haven't really seen him grappling a ton. Like, he fought Alexei Olynyk and Shamil and got pretty easy knockouts at both of them. He is a black belt theoretically, but Curtis plays a pretty good defensive jiu-jitsu. I mean, you don't need a ton of like technical knowledge when you're 265 pounds. You can just sit on top of the other dude. Like, it's tough to guard sub somebody at heavyweight. But I expect Blades to get takedowns here. I expect him to land on top. He's obviously a great play on DraftKings, as he is in every fight. I just don't love the visual I've seen from him, but I'm not really sure that Chris Daukaus, outside of like a flurry of punches knockout, has really anything to offer here for Blades. So I'll pick Blades. He's one of my guys, but I am a little bit worried about him in the longer term, John, long-winded breakdown from me here on the main event, but curious your thoughts, obviously, on Blades versus Dawkins, and then anything else for the rest of the card. And if once you've hit all of those bases, which I know I'm throwing a lot out of at you, feel free to take us out of here, my man.
Yeah, I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I think a lot of the same things as you, not just in this fight. I feel like we talk about it kind of in all of Curtis Blades' fight. It's like, obviously, he's a super high-level wrestler for this division. He's going to put up pace on his opponents. Almost all of his matchups, the only way he loses is if he gets knocked out. And most of the time, it's if it comes early. Like, outside of that, we know he's going to be winning minutes. We know he's probably going to be in dominant position for most of the fight. The only way to beat this dude, for the most part, is if you knock him out. And for at heavyweight, a lot of those times, the knockout needs to come early. And I think that's the same dynamic here with Chris Dawkins, who has power. He has fast hands. Can he defend a takedown? I don't think he can from Curtis Blades. Can he get up from bottom? I don't think he can from Curtis Blades. So it's like, it's kind of that Derek Lewis thing. It's like he has to time Blades coming in on a bad entry and just knock the guy out. And, how high do you rate that? I'd say Blades probably wins this 9 out of 10 times. So I have Blades closing out that chalk boy parlay. As we talked about earlier, I think Blades wins. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Obviously, Dawkins can knock him out. I don't think it's happening, but I also didn't think Derek Lewis was going to knock him out either. So, I got Blades here. Not some super high-level take, but I think Blades is a really strong play on DraftKings as well. One of the safest plays on the board, in my opinion. But yeah, that's all I got this week. I know we got some college basketball. So obviously we tried to do this a little bit earlier for you guys, get you out of here early so we can go sweat some college basketball. I was referring to Jonah. I need to make that clear. I was referring to him when I said the college basketball king. There were some people chirping. Maybe I was referring to myself as the king. Not the case. Those that know my bets know that I am not a good college basketball bettor. Too much fading Houston for you. So I was going to put it out. Hey. Bear down. U of A. I got a big bet on Arizona. I don't care. I'm going to fade Houston until I go homeless.
Before we get out of here, one of us is Houston futures and the other one loses every round trying to fade him. So I would side with the guy with the Houston futures, although I do think a little bit of a tough spot for them tonight. I think they'll be able to offensive rebound against Arizona. But that's not why the people are here. They're here to listen to the MMA takes. That is all 13 fights. John, I'll kick it back to you for the closing statement here.
No, that's all I got, guys. I'm Don Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time. Free Kane, bear down.